Overcoming our emotional struggles is quite the difficult task for some, but there's only really 3 steps to this. Stay tuned to find out here with the detail Ramon Phipps. Let's talk about overcoming our personal struggles, but more so how to do so. Understanding the true challenges of life is the first step towards being able to manage them. The first challenge is challenges that we were born into. For example, maybe we were born with a learning disability or into a low socioeconomic status. The second challenge is a result of our direct or even indirect choices. Direct choices could be something such as choosing to drive under the influence or allowing our emotions to overwhelm us so much that we then act out on them. The third challenge are unforeseen circumstances and events. These things include the loss of a loved one, or even something more so as simple such as driving to work one day and getting a flat tire. All of these things have something in common. We didn't see them coming, and these challenges in themselves may hit us like a brick in the face and cause us a lot of emotional turmoil, but with anything in life, we can prove to ourselves that we can overcome. And there is really only 3 steps to this: acceptance, coping, and adaptation. Acceptance. It is what it is. This is the best and most simple way to look at what acceptance is. Now, I have a talk on radical acceptance where I go in depth on this particular psychological theory, and I really shine a light on the difficulties that we face regarding acceptance and how we can truly achieve it and when to know that we've achieved it. But with anything, we need to start off with acceptance. It's a position of willingness to be open-minded and, of course, accepting of the circumstances of the situation. Maybe it was something that we had no control over, such as one of those earlier examples, being born into a low socioeconomic background. We may have troubles with social mobility in life at that point in time, but it does not mean that we cannot overcome. Maybe we were born with a learning disability and we found it hard to do things such as math, reading, or writing. These again are challenges that can create a huge hindrance towards our academic development, but they are still challenges that we can overcome. The biggest issue that people mainly face is that we do not practice self-awareness so that we are able to see our insecurities, our anxieties, our fears, our worries, our frustrations regarding the things that we fail to accept, the difficulties in life. Now, when it comes to being in a position of acceptance, we must practice self-awareness in order for us to be able to look it right in the face, look that thing that's really rubbing us the wrong way, dead in the eyes, and say to ourselves that I may not like that this is here, but I accept that it is here. Because with that form of embrace, we can allow ourselves to now start to work within the limitations of our own capabilities. And it might be that we do have difficulties in life that we may find it hard to overcome. But that's okay, because we must start somewhere. And when we begin the building blocks of acceptance, then we can allow ourselves to be able to transition into the other areas of overcoming our challenges in life. But everything will start with the mentality of wanting to accept. And acceptance is not us saying, hey, I'm okay with something. It's not the case. You don't have to be okay with something to accept it, but we must look at the reality of the picture and stop being so emotionally resistant towards the fact of the matter. And if the fact of the matter is that I have dysfunctional issues, whether it be regarding my mental health or my emotions or some behavioral patterns I may have, or maybe I have difficulties from external influences in my life, like the neighborhood I live in, the community I was brought up in, whatever it may be, first we need to start off accepting it. Then we can cope. To cope is to handle, manage, and persevere through a stressful situation. Coping is not driven by your motivation, believe it or not. What do I actually mean by that? Well, if you're sitting here having a bad day and you just want to be able to manage that situation, manage your mood, manage your attitude, then you should not rely on motivation to be able to bring you through that. If we rely on motivation, we're relied on this dopaminergic rise, this ability for our body to produce so much reward-seeking chemicals that it makes it easy, engaging, and euphoric in the way that we participate in our next task. That's why coping is very individualistic, because if it can't be based on motivation, then it must be based on an interest towards overcoming for a particular reason. Let me remind you of this. Coping always has to do with mental intention. Why am I commit into a task in the first place. There are many things that you can use for coping. Small list up here. You can do exercise, you could play a video game for a little bit, you can do some reading, you could talk to somebody, you can do an artistic expression activity, you can allow yourself to do some journaling, anything. These things in themselves are valuable activities that help to redirect our mind towards another task. And in that moment where we are mindful in another task, our emotions that might be anchored in a situation or event that we are now anxious, worried, or frustrated over, it can just dissipate. And it's not for the idea of just repressing or just pushing things to the side, but we allow our mind to be controlled towards something that we want to invest it into, instead of just allowing the intrusive and distractive thought patterns regarding our emotional phases to continue to overwhelm and define our life. Now, the most simple factor of coping is to be able to identify emotions. Without emotional identification, you are not going to be able to cope with anything whatsoever. The only thing that you ever cope with are emotions. You're not coping with thoughts. You're not coping with the circumstances of the world. You're not coping with other people. To cope means to manage, handle, and persevere through your emotions, and that's it. But how is one supposed to be able to manage an emotion if they're not able to observe the emotion? This is what brings us back to that acceptance piece. Acceptance helps open our eyes up to what's happening within us using self-awareness. And if our skill sets of emotional intelligence can allow us to now identify that I'm feeling happy, sad, angry, whatever the emotion may be. Am I angry? Am I sad? Am I a mix of the both? Whatever it may be, I just gotta find that emotion, say it to myself, admit it to myself, because I am human, all emotions are valid, and actually choose to manage it. Coping is only about the emotion. That is it. So if I'm angry, there are a lot of things that you can do to more directly cope with more excitatory emotional expressions such as anger or even high happiness. These things in them, or even anxiety. Going for exercise. These are great ways to put your body into a hyper-stressed state that actually caters itself to being able to match itself with the emotions you're already feeling and sublimate the two. Now, we can allow ourselves to see that coping could actually be very easy for us if we just begin to develop our skill sets of emotional awareness. How can you start to locate and identify your emotions more quickly? Well, you got to practice first and foremost. Here's an emotion chart. As you can see, there are a lot of secondary emotions that most people would easily utilize more organically in conversation or in expression. Sadness, anger, anxiety, and of course even happiness. These are our four main secondary emotions, but we always have primary emotions that may lead to these secondaries, and the primaries are usually ones that we are the most insecure about. But if you can at least start off with the secondary emotion, then maybe with the right practice and with the right training and with the right courage and willingness and acceptance, then you can find your way into what the actual primary emotion is, because that's when the true coping begins. But if secondary emotions is where you're at right now, that's okay. It takes some time and it takes some development, but we got to start somewhere. The last phase is adaptation. Now, human beings are meant to adapt. From the start of human civilization, we've only ever adapted. Whether you're talking about evolutionary biology, we adapted to new circumstances, new changes. Even when we were migrating from the continent in Africa to all different places of the world, everybody had to adapt to different climates, to different seasons, to the different environments that we were in. You are made to adapt, which is a great genetic advantage for any human. So what does adaptation now mean in regard to managing your emotional states? Well, adaptation is this ability to change ourselves to suit a new need. Now, if I were to accept that a difficulty exists within my life, and this difficulty is cultivating problematic emotions for me, then I were to manage those emotions only through identifying them and then choosing to actually relieve myself of them through doing activities that help sublimate them, then adaptation in itself must in some way be congruent to the phases that I've already gone through. Meaning that if I coped with my anger, then I should not re-engage back into that same situation that made me angry unless I have further understanding and maybe a different plan of action and strategy to be able to address it. Let's put out one example there. I was driving to work and now I got a flat tire. My whole world is upside down at this point. I'm worried about if I'm going to be able to make it to work, if I have to call in or my boss is going to be angry at me. What if I get fired? Oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my rent? So much things are going through me, but you know, I'm feeling a mix of fear, I'm feeling a mix of anger, whatever it may be. Those are the emotions I got to cope with. The circumstances that I must accept is the fact that I have a flat tire. Many people have flat tires. Hundreds of thousands of people have flat tires on a daily basis. I'm just one of the unfortunate few at this point in time. I accept that situation took place, nothing else I can do about it. I do not have control to rewind the hands of time and change the circumstance. Now that I'm able to locate the emotions, anger, frustration, whatever it may actually be, now I'm trying to cope with it. I could do a breath activity, I could call someone and just vent for a bit, but my intention to cope is to get this anger away out of me, just to express it, just to get it out so that I can now adapt to the situation and now think a little bit more clearly as to how I want to address this. Maybe now is a good time to call the tow truck. Maybe first I want to actually call my boss to tell him that I might not be in for work. But these adaptations in themselves are only because I was able to sublimate the emotions and see things a little bit more clearly. Adaptation is a necessity, and it's something that you are already wired to do. What you're not wired to do is look at your emotions more in depth, and that's where the skill of acceptance comes into play. If you're able to practice acceptance, then you're practicing self-awareness. If self-awareness now carries you to being able to identify your emotions, here you are managing the meat of the troublesome situation. And then adaptation is just us choosing to continue that trajectory of emotional management into our solutions. With these 3 steps, you should be able to cope with any situation that may come at you. And if you could remind yourself of one thing, if you're watching this video here today, you have coped with every difficulty in your life up until this point. Keep it going. Stay mindful.